I'm Tracie Decker, and you're listening to Deep Thoughts About Stupid Shit, because pop culture is still culture. And shouldn't you know what's in your head? Today I'll be sharing my deep thoughts about Ghostbusters, the original, with my sister, Emily Guy Birkin, and with you. So let's dive in. Have you ever had something you love dismissed because it's just pop culture? What others might deem stupid shit, you know matters. You know it's worth talking and thinking about. And so do we. Come overthink with us as we delve into our deep thoughts about stupid shit. All right, Em. So I know you've seen Ghostbusters. Tell me a little about like what you remember about Ghostbusters and sort of like how you first encountered it and, give me the Ghostbusters download.
So our dad took us to see Ghostbusters in the theater. It was 1984. I was 5. You were 8. I remember being a little frightened about going because I was scared of scary movies because of the poltergeist incident from just the year or 2 years before.
Oh my gosh. I still have nightmares about that movie.
I know. So this was back when, HBO and Cinemax and all of that were on. And if you didn't have a TV guide, you didn't know it was on TV. For you youngins who are listening, really and truly, there was no way of knowing what was on the big shiny box. And so we had turned on the TV on HBO, I guess it was, and didn't know what we were watching, but there was a little girl in it. And, I would have been like 3 or 4. Tracie would have been, 6 or 7.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were like, oh, like show about a little girl like us. And then by the time we realized it was a scary movie, that it was Poltergeist, both you and I were too afraid to leave the room, and Dad was invested, so he wouldn't turn the movie off. Which, like, stellar parenting, Dad.
Yeah,
really.
Way to go. Way to go, Pop.
Way to go. Because I would not go into any room by myself for an entire month afterwards, and that includes the bathroom. Like, people had to come in with me.
That was scary. Okay.
So,
but back to Ghostbusters. So Poltergeist, you were a little bit movie shy because of Poltergeist.
A little movie shy because of Poltergeist. I don't really remember much about seeing it in the theater, except Slimer having the hot dogs in his mouth. Because I felt like they looked like fingers. And then the only ghost that actually scared me was the one that's driving the taxi cab that looks like a kind of like a juicy
like
skeleton.
A rotted skeleton, yeah.
Yes. So I do recall, I remember the experience of seeing it in the theater, but that's about all I recall about it. From there, I remember watching it at sleepovers as I got older. And there were certain lines that I really liked. I also can remember really liking when Venkman was on screen because he was funny, but also being a little uncomfortable with him because of that early scene where he's flirting with the pretty girl who he's doing the psychic test, and he's shocking the guy who's chewing the gum. And I remember because that felt so wrong to me.
Because it was.
Yeah. And so I was uncomfortable with his character, even as I liked his character best. So that felt a little weird. And so it was just kind of like the standard 80s kid starter pack movie for me. And it wasn't until I think we were in college that I realized how much you loved it. Like, I knew that you liked it, but you didn't rewatch it over and over again like I did with Princess Bride. It was something that you had kind of an undercover obsession with it. And then it also became something, I think, because it is so beloved and there are so many products out there that are like geared towards the nostalgia for that movie, that it became a go-to gift for you. And so that's kind of how I focus on it. So there's all of those things, and then there's the quotability, because there are certain things like, Ray, when someone asks you if you are God, you say yes. You wouldn't be surprised how often that quote is needed in everyday life.
It's true.
So that's kind of my background with Ghostbusters. It's a movie that I really like and like to revisit, although it has given me some when I've revisited it in recent years. So tell me, why has this been a beloved movie for you, and why are we talking about it today?
Yeah. So it's actually, it's true that it was undercover, because it was when I was in college that I almost like rediscovered the movie. Now, as a teenager, I babysat, remember the kids a couple doors away at Dad's house? So I babysat them, and they were really into the animated show, The Real Ghostbusters.
I remember that show, yes.
So I watched that with them a lot. And then at some point in college, it was like Ghostbusters. And it was like I had like rediscovered my childhood like security blanket or something.
Yes.
When I found it again, and like I had it on VHS, and it was just like, it was comfort food. It was like, for those that sort of like late teens through mid 20s, for me, it really was like comfort food, comfort viewing, I guess. And it, and I've seen it so many times. I memorized the dialogue, so that when I was in graduate school and I was taking German, and I was like really struggling and wanting to practice my German, I bought a DVD of it dubbed into German to help me with my German, because I know that the dialogue so well in English. Kind of backfired, although I did learn how to say habt mich geschleimt. He slimed me, which is, pretty great.
Okay, I love that.
Yeah,
I know how to say, do you see what happens? Do you see what happens when you fuck a stranger in the ass, in French, for similar reasons?
Oy.
That's from The Big Lebowski. So go ahead.
Oy. Okay, so it had this sort of comfort food kind of placement in my life, and so much so that, like, as you say, it was a go-to gift for you. Others in my life, like, I have an original movie poster framed in my house of Ghostbusters. I have like the Japanese stuff, I don't know what to call it, like Japanese material merch for the movie from '84, like in kanji, which I don't read, but I have friends who do, and they tell me it says Gosto Bosto, which also I just think is pretty cool.
That's delightful,
isn't it? Yeah.
Yes.
So it occupies sort of a big place in like the makeup, in the way the furniture is arranged in my brain. And so anything that takes up that much space, I kind of want to take some time to really like examine it and see, like our tagline says, like, what actually is in my head. So I'll give you it, but for our listeners, just in case there's somebody who's listening who hasn't seen it or hasn't seen it in a while, I'm talking about the original 1984 Ghostbusters. I am not talking about the rest of the franchise. Maybe we'll come back to those. I don't have a whole lot to say about Ghostbusters 2, to be honest, but maybe we'll come back to those, or like the more recent ones, or maybe even that animated series that I mentioned, but the original, right? So we see these three guys, Dan Aykroyd, Bill Murray, and Harold Ramis. They work in a university. When we first meet them, that scene that you described, Bill Murray is conducting an experiment to see the effect of negative reinforcement on ESP ability, but he's a total charlatan. And in fact, in the commentary on the DVD, Harold Ramis and Ivan Reitman talk about the fact that they actually based that scene on that experiment, that famous experiment where everyday people are asked to give shock to others that they can't see. For making mistakes in like word lists. And the experiment was actually to see how much pain the subject of the test would give to the other, to the unseen victim. So Ramis said that this experiment was to see like how much of a jerk they could make their hero and have the audience still accept him as their hero, which is
very odd. That's very odd.
Well, I mean, it's got me thinking about anti-heroes in general, but it's like, it's an anti-hero. Like, so Bill Murray's Peter Venkman from this get-go. He's an anti-hero, like a completely banal anti-hero. It's not like Black Adam, who's an anti-hero because he had a horrible trauma.
Or even Walter White from Breaking Bad, where he's an anti-hero because he gets into cooking and dealing meth to pay for his cancer treatments, and then finds he likes it. He likes
Right.
being a drug kingpin.
Right. But it was like really like untenable
There's trauma
circumstances. There's
there.
untenable circumstances and trauma that sort of pushed those anti-heroes into their anti-hero status.
Hmm.
Peter Venkman's just a charlatan.
Yeah.
Right. And like and actually, like a couple scenes later, we see their sorry, I was giving the lowdown of how this movie works, and then I just got distracted by this very specific scene. Deep thoughts, y'all. That's how it goes. So let me come back to the nutshell. So these three dudes, the other two guys, Dan Aykroyd and Harold Ramis's characters, are legitimately like they care about the science. Bill Murray's character doesn't. So they get kicked out of the university and they decide to go into business for themselves as ghost hunters. So we actually sort of see the full development of that, like going to the bank and getting the money. They put a third mortgage on Dan Aykroyd's house,
childhood home
at like a huge interest rate to get the money to start this thing. They get an old fire station as their headquarters, and it's not going particularly well for them until Sigourney Weaver's character, Dana Barret, who is a musician, has something like a weird paranormal thing happen in her kitchen. So she comes, and then all of a sudden, like, they're getting business. So there are ghosts, and we see this, it's through a montage. There are ghosts everywhere, and they're catching them. So we get a fourth Ghostbuster, Ernie Hudson. He's a black guy, and he, in the storytelling arc, he actually serves as the audience proxy, so we can get a bunch of like downloads of like expository stuff of how this all works, where they do a whole bunch of pseudoscience. And then there's like, it builds up to a big boss where they have to defeat this like giant monster who happens to be made of marshmallow. Meanwhile, there's a human villain who works for the EPA. So that's the like a little bit of meandering, but that's the nutshell of what happens in this movie. So some of the things that I want to like dissect and examine with you, Em, are I want to talk about gender because we always have to talk about gender, especially in these things that from our childhood we didn't have a whole lot of representation. I want to talk about I do actually want to come back to the anti-hero status of Bill Murray's Peter Venkman because in some ways, Em, you as a 5-year-old were more aware of the subtlety and nuance and problematics of that character than I was, as a 20-year-old when I watched it. So I want to come back to that. And I also want to talk about the fact that the villain is the EPA guy.
I know that
This
bothers me so much.
Deeply problematic to me, especially in the 80s.
Reagan 80s. Yeah.
Because at that point, actually, if we, the writ large, not you and me, because we were children, but if American society, if the West, if the global community had made different choices starting in 1984, then we wouldn't be, living in this current global climate change hellscape that we're living in. So I want to come back to that. And I'm sure other things will come up as we talk because they always do. So I think I'll start with Bill Murray's Peter Venkman, though, because that's where that's where my energy was. So I'll start there. Yeah. So from the very beginning, self-consciously on the part of the movie makers, like this guy's shady, right? But also charming, as 5-year-old Emily saw, right? Like he's very likable and also a dick, right? Yeah. Like Sigourney Weaver's character says, you're more like a game show host than a scientist.
I have thought about this when I was a teenager. I remember our mom saying she worries that I would end up with a serial killer if he made me laugh, because to me, someone being funny is like what I prize most. And some of that I think is who I am. But a lot of it is how I was socialized by things like Ghostbusters, where like I can forgive Peter Venkman for shocking a guy who was getting things right. So it wasn't even just
the last one he gets right. What actually, that's what's really interesting if we overthink it, is that whatever hypothesis he had about negative reinforcement on ESP ability, it seemed to be working, because that kid, you get it wrong, and then he gets it right.
Yeah.
A couple of wavy lines.
Yeah. And who cares? Doesn't matter. Pretty girls there. So, but that's an aspect of it that has me like really wondering, like why are we so willing to forgive someone who can make us laugh?
Yeah.
So, but I just wanted to jump in with that, because that there is that aspect of it that's, you know, I don't know if you remember Mom saying that when I was a teenager. Like,
no, I don't, but
oh boy, yeah,
it sounds like something she would say. Yeah. So I rewatched the DVD with a commentary in order to prep for our conversation. And like some of the things that, and maybe this actually like feeds into your kind of dilemma there. Like these guys worked together before on like SCTV, which was just like a sketch comedy thing out of Canada, but also like their first movie was Animal House, which is a little before our time. It's a 1978 film. So like I don't have any like strong memories, but it's like it's a frat house movie, you know, and it's about sort of some of the shenanigans, and there's always objectification in frat house movies. I'm sorry, there just is objectification of women. And I think that is also true of Animal House. And that's where, you know, that's sort of the comedy scene out of which these guys were coming. And the camaraderie between them, between Ivan Reitman, Bill Murray, and Dan Aykroyd, like the camaraderie between the three characters feels authentic, because it is, because those actors have known each other a long time and been working together for a long time at the stage at which they made this movie. But I think it's an interesting sort of moment in thinking, like for us as this time capsule where the comedy was moving from that like just kind of gross like guys club stuff toward the contemporary moment. And that was like sort of an in-between moment where they had this sort of pseudoscience aspect of it, which Dan Aykroyd apparently is like the mastermind of and just adored, and that's like his thing. And he would, in fact, in the commentary that I was listening to, Ramis said that Aykroyd would write these like long monologues that had all this like pseudoscientific stuff for other people to deliver, and they just like other actors would just like not be able to do it, and Aykroyd would be like, "What's the problem?" He'd come and like deliver the like the mass sponge migration of 1908, whatever it is. Anyway, so I think that's sort of an interesting thing to think about in a meta way, in the sort of the culture of comedy, and how that moves. And in fact, one of the things that on the commentary that they talked about that I feel like maybe you and I've talked about, not on Deep Thoughts, but maybe we did talk about it on Lightbringers. They talked about sort of the domino theory of realism. So you start with things that the audience could totally believe in, and then you take incremental steps toward the outlandish, which is what this movie does. It starts with these guys getting kind of, you know, losing their jobs and like going into business it's just a weird business, but going into business for themselves. And then, you know, you work in incremental steps up to 100-foot marshmallow man stepping on a church in Manhattan. And I think that's also sort of, you know, how we get from Animal House to sort of now more, you know, the mid 2020s and where comedy is today. I don't know where I'm going with this. But
so something interesting, I think also, just in talking about what that background is and the kind of fratty kind of comedy, the dream sequence in the middle of the movie, where Ray Stantz, Dan Aykroyd's character, has a dream that a ghost comes and basically goes down on him. I didn't understand what I was seeing when I saw that as a child, but I knew it was something adult. And I couldn't tell you when it came to me where I was just like, why is this in the movie? But that question like came relatively early. Like this was not something I wondered in my 30s when I was watching it. I remember wondering it like, why is this in the movie? What does this do? And it's that same sort of thing where like it is titillating simply for the point of titillating.
Well,
Um,
yes, exactly. And I think and they talk about it in the commentary that it actually was a much longer scene. You end up with only a very brief piece of it, but originally it was a much longer scene. And I think that is evidence of this group's like sort of Animal House background. Like that's
mhm.
part of what they, I mean, there are other sort of sexual moments or at least implications in the movie.
When I rewatched it, so I've rewatched it recently twice. Once about 3 or 4 years ago, I showed it to a friend who is about 7 years younger than me, who had never seen it. And then I also recently watched it with the kids. Um, and seeing it, it was post Me Too
Mhm.
when I saw it recently. The fact that Dana Barrett and Louis Tully, who's played by Rick Moranis, have sex while they're each possessed by the gate master and the key the key master and the gatekeeper.
Mhm.
Yeah. Is so gross.
So gross.
It is so gross. And it is played for laughs. And Louis Tully's obsession with her is played for laughs. And in some ways, I mean, like Rick Moranis is a charming actor. He manages to make himself seem harmless.
Yep.
Even as he's annoying.
Yeah.
And some of it has to do with the height difference because Sigourney Weaver is,
Yeah, she towers over him.
An Amazon of
Mhm.
gorgeous proportions. And then I think Rick Moranis is the same height as me. He's 5'4".
Right. Yeah.
And so some of it is that. But, honestly, like a woman having to tiptoe past her neighbor's door every time she comes home, that's grim. And then the movie rewards his obsession with her,
Mm-hmm.
even though neither of them will remember it.
Mm-hmm.
But that's that
Yeah.
is very unpleasant.
Yeah.
And something I didn't understand that had happened.
Me neither.
Think until I watched it recently.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it is. And
in my 20s,
I even
I
pointed out.
But
yeah, I pointed out to my spouse when we watched it with our friend, and he's like, "That's not what happened." I'm like, I
seriously?
rewound. I'm like, "Look, he's
Key
like,
master gatekeeper, especially the
yeah.
way. If you had any doubt, the way that Dana, when she's possessed, interacts with Peter makes that clear. I want you inside me, sub creature.
Yeah, and then when they're on the bench,
Mm-hmm.
it's postcoital.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's very clearly postcoital.
Mm-hmm.
So like I rewound and showed him that scene again. He's like, okay, yeah, I get that. But it's nostalgia. My spouse has nostalgia for this movie and doesn't want to believe that it's a part of this culture that we've been grappling with so strongly since 2017.
Speaking of that scene where Venkman comes over to Dana's apartment for a date, which, I mean, yeah, I guess she calls it a date, so it is a date. And she's been possessed, and so he knows she's possessed. He says so, and she's like, Zool is trying to have sex with the keymaster, who he has said he is, and he's kind of like, I make it a policy never to get involved with possessed people, and like, but he's like, she says, take me now. Like she says lots and lots of things. There are multiple lines where she invites him to have sex with her, and he's like, sure, go. No, like he says yes and then he says no, like, and he doesn't. But it's like we're supposed to reward him. I don't know. And then why does he have 300 cc's of Thorazine
with him on a date?
Ew.
So I had not realized the connection to Animal House until you just mentioned it. But there's a scene very much like this in Animal House. Do you remember? Have you?
I don't know if I've ever seen it. If I have, I don't remember any of it.
I didn't see it until I think I was in college, and I was horrified. But there's a scene where one of the frat brothers has a teenage girl who has come to the party, who has drank so much she's passed out, and he has an angel and a devil appear on his shoulder. And the devil is like, go on, fuck her. And the angel's like, no. And he doesn't. And even in like 1998, when I was watching it, I was sitting there going like, how is this okay? Like, why are we supposed to see this as like, wow, what a good guy?
Yeah. He didn't rape an unconscious woman.
Yeah, and not just woman, underage girl. She's a high school kid who snuck in. Ugh. And some of that is just, that is our culture.
It totally is, because in the commentary, I couldn't tell that there were three guys who do the commentary on the DVD. It was like the 30th anniversary edition. It was Harold Ramis and Ivan Reitman. I'm not sure who the third person was. But one of them was like, this is one of my favorite scenes in the whole movie. About the scene with Peter Venkman and Dana, when Dana Zool. And I was like, gross, guys. I mean, and I think part of what they were saying they liked was like that they did a lot of work to do the physical, the special effects, because this was like pre, CGI days.
CGI.
So they actually had Sigourney Weaver in this like full body cast that could hold her weight for when, because she like levitates off the bed and then spins. Yeah. And so they're actually there together with her levitating off the bed. And so Bill Murray's able to like kind of like sneak under and like look at her, and then she like growls at him, and that's all actually happening. And so there's an authenticity to it.
That is very cool technically.
Right.
Yes.
But in terms of like what's happening if we do what we do, this like thinking about the societal implications, like, yuck. I wish that weren't a part of my, like, the mental furniture of my psyche. That's really unpleasant.
Okay, so I will tell you, you know how I mentioned during Princess Bride episode that I'm very literal and, I thought true love was a thing. So I thought there was something sexy about sleeping on top of your covers. Because Venkman
says, I find her interesting because she sleeps above her covers. 4 feet above her covers.
So I was just like, okay, so is that a thing? It's like, okay, sexy women
sleep on top of their covers. That is so funny, Em. That is so funny. Oh, man.
So just, I suspect that as you listen to Deep Thoughts, you're going to like skip through the fields of my misunderstanding of things as a literal child.
Yeah.
Speaking of the mental furniture in our heads.
All right. So let's talk about gender.
Yes.
Well, I mean, we're already talking about gender a little bit, but a little bit more. Yeah. I'm going to bring up the Bechdel test again, which is really interesting. I just read an interview with Alison Bechdel. I think I sent it to you, where Alison Bechdel's like, I wish this weren't a thing. I wish this weren't the thing I were known for. Like, it was a joke in her comic, Dykes to Look Out For.
Dykes to Watch Out For.
Watch out for. And she didn't intend it to be an actual thing that like scholars use. Sorry, Alison. It's awesome. It's useful. It's really useful.
It is so useful. It's one of those things where like I totally comprehend why she wishes this wasn't the thing she's known for, since she's such a talented writer and cartoonist.
Yeah.
But at the same time, she has given a name to something that we needed a name for.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, like, yeah.
So to reiterate, Alison Bechdel's test is, are there at least 2 female characters? Do they both have names? Do they talk to one another about something other than men, or a man or a boy? And Ghostbusters maybe barely kind of squeaks by, kind of. We definitely have more. We definitely have at least 2 female characters with names, because we've got Dana and we've got Janine, the Annie Potts's receptionist, and the 2 of them speak to one another very briefly. When Dana comes into the firehouse to get help, and she says, "Is this a Ghostbusters?" and Janine says, "Yes, may I help you?" She's then Dana Barret says her name, and Bill Murray's Peter Venkman comes running from the back, and that's the extent of their conversation. So I guess it passes the test, since it is sort of a yes/no, but it's like, if it were a spectrum, it'd be like way down on the bottom, right?
Yeah,
it's pretty. Yeah. It's not much of an interaction between those 2, and Bill, Peter Venkman like interrupts it, and neither of these women are fully fleshed out characters. They're both relatively 2-dimensional, right? So Dana has more of a character than Janine does. And she is an accomplished person. She's a musician who plays a professional cellist. And we do see a little bit of her internal life, but very little. And Janine, I mean, Annie Potts is great. She's very funny.
She's fantastic.
Her delivery is very funny, but it's a caricature. She's sort of a caricature of this, New York person. And even when she's sort of, there's this kind of, it never quite gels, but there's this kind of like romantic interest between Janine and Harold Ramis's character that never quite gels. And it's just played for laugh. Even her interest in him is played for laugh.
So something I have noticed, particularly about movies from that time frame, but it still exists, is that, like, I was thinking about that when you're saying, like, when Venkman comes, like, he vaults over the railing to come talk to Dana. The highest level that a woman can accomplish in a lot of these stories is to be beautiful. And so women who are not beautiful are played for laughs. And so Dana is virtuous because she's beautiful and people are like interested in her, like Peter and Louis Tully, and all of that. And we see this again and again where like the only thing that matters is that this person is beautiful. And the only other named character in the movie is Janine, who honestly, like, Annie Potts is lovely.
She is. She's a good looking woman.
She's playing a caricature, and they give her the very big glasses.
Mm-hmm.
But those were popular in the 80s. I mean, that's what kind of glasses you wore. And so her interest in Egon is humorous in the same way that Louis Tully's interest in Dana is humorous. It's just like, why, it's less of a mismatch because Egon's not handsome or not played to be handsome.
It's less of a mismatch too, because I feel like there's this social awkwardness. I think that's part of what like Rick Moranis as Louis Tully is not particularly attractive, but I think the mismatch is in his total social awkwardness. Like, I invited clients instead of friends. There's almost like I think the movie makers wanted us to believe there was actually a bit of a match between
a possible spark between them,
Janine and Egon, which I don't, because she says, like, some of my friends say I'm too intellectual, but I think it's a wonderful way to spend your time. And then like, so she sort of puts on the nerdy, and then he has to one up her because she says, "What do you, what do you have any hobbies?" And he says, "I collect spores, molds, and fungus." Like, it's similarly ridiculous, but for different reasons.
Yeah. So, well, I think it's also important to bring up the other two female characters we see, which is the librarian at the beginning, who is kind of, when I was old enough to understand what menstruation was, because I wasn't when I first watched this, I remember being like, isn't she too old to have her period? And there's this sense of like, and the way that Venkman treats her, she is an object of ridicule when he is interviewing her.
Yeah.
And like, how dare this woman have gray hair? And then there's the real estate agent who, we don't really get much from her except that she knows when she's got them. She knows like,
she's
right, so I see you got them.
Just cheerful. Yeah. Sorry, where were you going with her?
But she also, she's cheerful, but she also is sharp in that, like, the minute Dan Aykroyd's character is like, this place is great, she's like, all right, so you're going to be taking it, right? And is kind of, I don't know if that's supposed to be about real estate agents, if that's supposed to be about women, if that's or what, but there's this sense of like, I've got you over a barrel, and we're going with it.
I actually didn't I didn't get that from her so much. I mean, it was more like, because she sees the situation that like Aykroyd wants the place and it's actually his money. But I don't think you're wrong. I didn't read it quite like that. There is one other woman too, Jennifer, the very beginning.
Oh,
you're no fluke, Jennifer.
And honestly, the thing that actually really bothered me as a kid was not so much the way Peter Venkman was acting, although it bothered me. It was when Jennifer was feeling sympathy and like worried for this guy who's about to get shocked, and Venkman like winks at her and smiles, and so she relaxes, like, oh, it's okay. That really bothered me, because I'm like, why is she okay with it? Because he's flirting with her.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, and that kind of gets into the same sort of thing where like being a beautiful woman is kind of like the highest level. Even to the point where like, you know, I was just about to say 8 o'clock,
Mm-hmm.
you know, like you do have ESP, and she's willing to believe it.
Mm-hmm.
It's murky. Whatever it is that I'm trying to describe is murky, because, you know, it's not as if the writers like came at this like, we hate women and we're going to do this.
Mm-mm.
It's not, I mean, you know, it's not that kind of misogyny or sexism. It's just the culture we swim in, where we prize youth and beauty in women. We don't necessarily prize experience or competence.
Well, to your point, in this movie in particular, the one moment when Peter actually praises Dana for her skill, because he listened to her rehearsal, he says, "You're the best one in your row," and she says,
Mhm.
"Oh, you're good. Most people can't hear me with a whole orchestra playing around me." So she actually like shuts it down. Like she shuts down the compliment, which I guess is ridiculous. I don't know, but he was actually talking about something other than how she looks,
True.
and she shut it down.
I will say though, that's the kind of compliment where like, I don't think it is possible to hear her over the rest of the orchestra. And so she knows he's being disingenuous.
Right. Though it also, he came to hear a rehearsal. I don't know. It's
True.
complicated. You're right.
Yeah.
It's a come on line, and she knows it, and she shuts down the come on line. So,
Yeah.
and you know, I don't know. I feel like Dana actually is, in part because I think Sigourney Weaver is a good actress, and she brings a level of like gravitas to the part that could have been just a throwaway, but she brings sort of some heart to it. Dana,
why my ice box?
yeah, exactly.
You know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, are you sure you're using that thing correctly?
Yeah.
So she just brings a certain level of something to it. Actually, I'm going to come back to the icebox. That I really admire and sort of believe, even like what we see her doing in her home, which is way too big for one person to be able to afford. I don't know what a cellist makes, but I don't think it's enough to afford that apartment.
Nope.
In 1984.
I will say, I give large spaces a pass in film and TV because of the practical needs for cameras.
Yeah, the demands
so
of
like
filming. Absolutely.
The demands of filming means I'm okay with friends having a giant apartment.
Yeah, I don't know, but the two, they were like, this is like a corner of windows. It's like a big corner. Anyway, but the icebox, the fact that you brought up the icebox, my German experiment actually backfired, because and this is interesting, like the translator's dilemma, right? Like she says that, and that's sort of like an arcane, even in 84, like people didn't say that, right? Icebox is not what we call our fridge. And so, but in German, that's the word for your refrigerator. So in order to kind of get that about her character, the point where he comes in, he like opens the closet door, and she's like, that's just the closet. In the German translation, in the dubbing, she says like, das ist the Kammer, or something like that. The word comma, which is Kammer, which is apparently like an old fashioned word for closet. So I tried to use that word with my German teacher, and he was like, what are you saying? And I think the translators used this archaic word for closet because icebox is not.
They couldn't
do it for a fridge.
I love that.
Oh, it's so funny.
Let's and I'd love to get to Ernie Hudson.
Agreed. Yes.
But let's talk about the EPA.
Yeah. Yeah.
And how very conservative this movie is.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, it's really interesting, because I feel like what they really wanted to lambast was bureaucracy. Right. And it was sort of like the gatekeeper, right? Like the way that Walter Atherton plays, William Atherton plays Walter Peck, is as just a gatekeeper bureaucrat. Like he's annoyed that he wasn't consulted. And that is annoying. Like the kind of gatekeeping, like, in fact, you and I had a conversation about it before we came on, about somebody in your hometown who is like that, who makes life difficult for everyone because he can.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
deserves to be lambasted. The fact that they made it the Environmental Protection Agency, that was that sort of Kafkaesque bureaucrat who has no idea what he's actually doing, was a choice. That was a choice.
Mm-hmm.
That was a choice.
Mm-hmm. And the movie proves Walter Peck right.
That was a choice.
And the movie proves Walter Peck right. Because, well, he says, like, you've got this unlicensed thing. And how do we know it's not going to create a catastrophe? Now, it creates a catastrophe when it does, because he brings someone to shut it off. But no system is completely fail-safe. So even if he hadn't shut it off,
a blackout, a
in
brownout,
5 years or 10 years or something would have happened. Like, what was the plan for the Ghostbusters when they sold the business, when they ended the business, when they had to move because that building was
right,
just
or just
whatever
even like, imagine it a good thing, like they're ready to retire.
Yes.
Or the storage facility gets full or whatever. Yeah, that's a good point.
It rusts, and so, like, the thing about Walter Peck is that he is proven absolutely correct, even though it's through his own actions. But there's a reason why you shouldn't carry a nuclear reactor on your back, and you shouldn't have a containment system that you have not gotten the proper permits for. Like, you couldn't put a giant septic tank under a building in New York City without getting the proper permits.
Well, like, I don't know, like, that the permit exists for the ghost containment system. Like, I don't know that it's the permitting that actually is. I think permits in general serve a purpose, but they are not in and of themselves valid.
Yeah.
They're not in and of themselves worth much.
I'm using the word permit because the way that I read this film is like very anti-regulation.
Yeah.
Because I read this film as very pro-capitalism, pro-business, anti-regulation, because regulations, they just screw things up. They get in the way. And so when I say permits, it's not so much that I think that, like, yes, I'm going to go down to City Hall and get a ghost busting permit.
Right.
It's not that. It's more that there are permits, there are regulations, there are things you have to ask permission for, specifically because you don't live here by yourself, specifically because these things are going to affect other people. And even when the Ghostbusters are successful, when they catch Slimer in the
hotel, the Sedgwick
hotel, yeah, they cause so much damage. So much damage.
Yeah.
And so that they're not insured, they're not licensed, they're not, and like, this is, I know I'm reductio ad absurdum. Like, this is getting really, like, if you're thinking about this, like, why would you need that? But I am reminded of how Uber has replaced taxi cabs. Taxi cabs, you have to have a medallion, which requires like bonding and licensure and insurance and all of these things.
Super expensive.
And it is super, like, each one costs like $50,000.
Yeah, a lot of money. More.
And my spouse's uncle owned something like 35 medallions in Boston. So I know a little bit about it background wise. And the thing is, being a taxi cab driver is very dangerous. This uncle was held at gunpoint like more times than you can count on one hand in the 30 years he did this. And that's terrible. They carry a lot of money, all of that. So Uber fixed that in some ways because, like, with the app, you can get that, but it superseded all of the regulations and requirements, and it put both the drivers and the passengers and everyone else on the road at risk. And it's because it is disrupting the taxi cab system, but there's a reason why the system was the way that it was. So in my day job, I write about money. So I have strong opinions about things like insurance. I have strong opinions about things like regulation, because they affect more than just the person who is trying to get, a new small business off the ground. And there's a reason they mortgaged Dan Aykroyd's family home rather than going to the Small Business Administration. Like, there's a reason they couldn't do that, and it's because it wasn't a proven business model, and it wasn't a proven business model in part because it was dangerous. So I'll get off my soapbox now.
It's an interesting point.
So I thought a lot about money as a child, without knowing that that's like, there's a reason why I went into what I do. I'm a money nerd. And multiple Dan Aykroyd movies actually kind of gave me some of the framework for thinking about money. This one, I didn't really recognize as a child, but the way that we look at capitalism, the way that we look at money, the way that we look at investing, the way that we look at all of these different things is shaped by the stories that we tell about it. So even the fact that, Ray is going like, I was born in that home. My parents left me that home when they died. And and Egon is just like, at 19% interest, it's going to be, this just in it. And we are conditioned to see that, like, but they made the right choice because they got the Ghostbusters out of it. And some of that storytelling, like, you got to take risks in order to have a story. But over and over and over again, movies show us that unreasonable financial risks are worth it because they pan out for the hero. And that's something that I really wish we had a way of dealing with while still respecting the importance of risk and story, because it over and over again makes people think like, oh, no, it'll work out if I mortgage the family home. It'll work out if I buy a lottery ticket instead of, it'll work out if I put everything on this risky thing because I will win because I'm the main character.
Yeah. I don't want to let you go until we talk about Ernie Hudson.
Yes.
Actually, because now I know I said I was only going to talk about the original, but actually the reboot with the women with Leslie Jones in that sort of role made me look with a more critical eye back at the 1984. And like I said, I have the movie poster from 84. Something that I find really interesting, not in a good way, is Ernie Hudson's erasure from the promotional materials, right? So the poster that I have in my home says, "They're here to save the world." And it's the three white Ghostbusters, like looking up, like with like pointing the proton packs up. And Ernie Hudson's not in the poster, and he's not in a lot of the promotional things. Now they fixed that in the DVD I have. Is like the 30-year anniversary edition from 10 years ago, and it does have Ernie Hudson in the image. So at some point somebody was like, wait, why'd we erase the black guy? Which is good that was caught, but interesting that it wasn't at the time, especially because though it's true he joins at the end, or not at the end, he joins midway through. He's an essential piece of the storytelling. And New Yorkers, this is one of the great like New York movies that people like. New Yorkers really love this movie because of the way it portrays the city. And in fact, they knew that at the time. One of the last lines in the movie is Ernie Hudson, like covered in the shaving cream that's supposed to be marshmallow, arms outstretched. I love this town. And that they gave that to Ernie Hudson. They gave that to Winston.
Winston Zedemore.
They gave that to Winston to say. That wasn't like it easily could have been any of them to say that, but Winston got that line. But the racism, the supremacy, it's like so baked in. I just rewatched it, and then I'll let you say, I just rewatched it before we hopped on. And in the scene at the very end when they're about to go into the building to face the big baddie, Winston is there, but he's sort of behind one of them. So so you can't see him. I was like, wait, where is he? Because he climbs up out when they fall down in the vault in the street. He climbs up out, but he was standing behind. So they framed the shot with him behind.
Intentionally.
That's a choice. I cannot believe that wasn't a choice, because I know they didn't get it in one take. It's not like they were like, oops, he was standing behind Dan Aykroyd. And like, wow. What were you going to say?
So something I find interesting is that, and this is like a convergence of Ernie Hudson and Winston Zedemore. So Ernie Hudson is removed from the promotional materials, but when the four of them are arrested, he's in just as much trouble as the other three. So like, he doesn't get the plaudits, but he does get the consequences. And again, this is like, I'm conflating the character and the actor. But that to me like feels very true to life. Now one of the things I love about Winston is he is very pragmatic. He's like, you know, if there's a steady paycheck in it, I'll do
anything you say.
ask.
Yep.
Yeah. And then when he says like, I'm getting my own lawyer.
Yep.
Good for you.
Yep.
That's exactly what you need to do. And then even when he's like, I have seen shit that will turn you white.
Yep.
Like,
so he's trying to convince the mayor. So in that scene, they're in the mayor's office and the guys are just like, you know, the mayor's like, what's happening? And Walter Peck is saying like, this isn't real. And, you know, so Winston steps forward and says, I've only been with these men for a few weeks, but since I joined them, I've seen shit that will turn you white. It's one of the most quotable, one of the many quotable lines from this movie.
Yeah. And Ernie Hudson gets a lot of really good lines.
Yeah, he gets when somebody asks you if you're a god, you say yes. That's Winston.
Yes.
He also says gets the like, we had the tools, we had the talent.
Yeah. And that's and I think that speaks to he is for the short amount of time he's in the film, I feel like he's relatively well realized. In part because you do see him as this person who is pragmatic, who, you know, he's just in it for a job, but he's like happy to work really hard. I mean, there's a lot in there and some of it is just Ernie Hudson. He's a charming actor, and I really wish that he had the kind of career arc that Bill Murray and Dan Aykroyd and Harold Ramis did after this. In any case, it's so frustrating that you have all of this, and he gets erased in the promotional stuff, and he also got a smaller part. I read that they had originally written him to have a larger part, and he was like a former Marine or something like that, or an Air Force, I don't remember, and they cut it down, and he was pissed about it, but he's like,
it's a job.
It's a job. So to bring up the reboot with the four women, it was very frustrating that Leslie Jones, and I love Leslie Jones, and she did a fantastic job. Like all four of the actresses, I think, did the best they could with not great material. But why did they make her someone who, you know, just worked in New York instead of one of the parapsychologists?
It was such a cliche that she was the street smart Black lady who joined them, you know, and brought her street smarts to their book smarts. It was just such a cliche.
So frustrating. So it's there are a lot of remakes and reboots and that there have been from the beginning, like, because Dan Aykroyd has always wanted this to be a franchise. And, you know, we had the real Ghostbusters animated show. We had Ghostbusters 2. There's been a bunch. I really wish we didn't, honestly, because I think that this film is what it is. It's a film and it's not a franchise. But I do wish that we could like kind of go back and correct some of the things. And I had this thought when Gozer says choose and perish. Yes. And Ray, he's like, I tried to think of something that would never harm us, something from my childhood. And I had this realization. I was like, that's Ghostbusters. So now in 2023, when, you know, you want to look back on something that gives you nostalgia, that feels good, that would never harm you, you go like, that great movie from my childhood. But then it arrives and you're like, there's rape, there's really weird gendered stuff, there's racism, there's very, very regressive conservative politics. And so like, I was just like, wow, the Marshmallow Man is
movie
Ghostbusters.
Mother puss bucket. Oh man. All right. I think you're right. I think that's a beautiful, beautiful metaphor.
Thank you.
So we've been talking for a long minute. This is longer than we usually talk. Let me see if I can synthesize and you fill in, right? So you just did pretty nicely, actually, in the analogy. There's messed up, there's just regressive gender roles. There's very unsavory sexual politics and sexual activity, very unsavory. There's racism. There's sort of the rewarding of extreme risk taking in terms of finance that you brought up, and there's also this it's not just the conservative politics of anti-regulation. They also made it about the Environmental Protection Agency in 1984. And also a really, really quotable movie.
That's so
you
quotable.
Made a date tonight?
The walls in the 53rd precinct were bleeding.
How do you explain that?
Dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria.
Yeah.
So that's quite a few deep thoughts about stupid shit.
Yeah.
Although, by the way, I would love for any listeners to comment your favorite quotes from Ghostbusters.
Yeah,
if
good
we've
call.
missed any.
Good call. So next time, Em.
Next time, we are going to have a guest, Dr. Julian Womble, who is going to be talking to us about Harry Potter.
Yeah, I'm super excited. His TikToks are amazing.
His TikToks are fantastic.
Yeah.
If you haven't seen them, you should check them out.
Yeah.
He brings light to things that I never even thought of in the Harry Potter franchise.
He's so smart. So smart. Can't wait to sit down with him.
Thanks for listening. Our theme music is Professor Umlaut by Kevin MacLeod from Incompetech.com. Find full music credits in the show notes. Deep Thoughts is a labor of love, but that doesn't make it free to produce. You can help keep us overthinking. Support us through our Patreon with a link in the show notes. Leave a positive review so others can find us. And share the show with your people. Until next time, remember, pop culture is still culture. And shouldn't you know what's in your head?